Happy anniversary!
Lyra Heartstrings peeked her eyes open, being slightly startled from the mirror in her side of vision. Just inches from the bedside stood Bonbon, a smile on her face and her eyes glimmering with happiness. Lyra came to her senses and with a giggle, smiled back.
Happy anniversary.
In response, Bonbon just pressed her lips to Lyra's, which Lyra accepted, enjoying her mere friend's embrace in that moment of bliss. It had not even been 5 minutes into her day, and already she was satisfied. The kiss broke as Lyra yawned and rubbed her eyes free of the leftover sand in the corners of her eyes, planted there by the sand mare the night prior. Bonbon giggled at the sounds of Lyra's long exaggerated yawn, turning away from the bed.
What do you want for breakfast, sleepyhead?
Anything is fine, Bon.
Blueberry pancakes it is then. Just don't fall asleep again. We've got a long day ahead, and we can't afford to lounge around.
Alright. I'll be down in a minute. Just give me a minute to straighten up, Bongs.
Lyra promised, lifting the covers from her body and planting her hooves on the floor.
Alright, I'll get the pancakes started. Just don't get the brush stuck in your mane. Again.
Don't worry, Bongs, I won't.
Lyra said with a sheepish smile that spelled out reasons that made Bonbon unsure if she should have left Lyra alone as she walked out of the room. Once the coast was clear, Lyra proceeded into the bedroom bathroom, closing the door behind her. To wake herself up a little faster, Lyra drenched the provided wash rag with some hot water and wiped her face a few times. The heat and steam was more soothing than anything, and as a result, Lyra had begun to fall asleep again. Lyra caught herself, and to counteract the effects of the heat, she quickly shifted the water temperature running from the tap to ice cold. She soaked the rag again and ran it over her face again, quickly countering all of the effects of the hot rag. In a mix of her simple naivety and sheepish actions to resolve the issue, she muttered out 2 words, staring at herself in the mirror.
I'm up.
After a breakfast that seemed more like a 5-star meal fit for only the finest of mares, Lyra and Bonbon had proceeded to their plans for the day. Lyra had managed to style her mane without hitting any snags, despite her small conflict with the hot wash rag just before. She wanted to look decent for her beloved Bonbon, and just from the glance of bafflement and the light blush on both of Bonbon's cheeks, she clearly had succeeded. The blueberry pancakes that Bonbon had made were sweet and nothing short of delicious. Even though it was meant to be simple and quick, it had seemed like it had been cooked by a 5-star chef. Bonbon was a great cook regardless, but Lyra knew it was Bonbon's way of showing her that she had never regretted a moment being wedded to her, despite her naivety. She found it more cute than anything, and was one of the qualities about Lyra Bonbon loved. The two had been friends since high school, but their first meeting had not been the most pleasant of greetings. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Bonbon, or Hard Candy as she had been addressed back then, was part of a group of mean mares that picked on the more unusual students. Lyra was one of those students, constantly speculating on a world beyond Equestria after seeing an illustration of unusual hieroglyphs in a history book. Some strange imprint with 5 separate ligaments of different lengths. She thought it was some sort of bizarre and disfigured hoof imprint, or possibly some otherworldly creature from beyond Equestria. This had caught the eye of Bonbon's group of mean mares, and resulted in relentless taunting, harassment, and misery for Lyra. Bonbon, or Hard Candy, was by far the most brutal and relentless, even inflicting physical pain toward the young aquamarine mare. Lyra had been cornered in an alleyway by Bonbon's group, and it was at this point that Lyra had reached a breaking point. Bonbon had gotten into Lyra's face, taunting, laughing, and spitting into the lone filly's face. Once the spit had made contact, Lyra had struck back in defense, landing a hard kick to Bonbon's ribs. The impact had made Bonbon falter just a little, quickly regaining her composure, then striking back at Lyra with punches and kicks. By the time it was over, Lyra was on the ground with a great deal of pain. She was bleeding from her mouth and crying from both the painful strikes and the mental pain she had no choice but to toughen through. The school system was mediocre and preferred to watch students get tortured, so Lyra had no help there. Out of all the hardship, Lyra had begun to make excuses not to go to school, starting with a fake cold. That lasted 4 days, and no matter how hard she tried to convince her mother and father otherwise, she had to go back to her personal Tartarus. The bullying continued for weeks, until Lyra was faced with the test of forgiveness. One day in the halls, Lyra had spotted the gang of mean mares Bonbon had been part of. They had cornered some pony and were attacking their prey with vulgar insults of anger. Lyra wanted to just keep walking and not even get involved, but something was telling her to stay. Had she not, she would have never been wedded to her precious Bonbon. It was when Lyra caught eye of the victim that she felt conflicted on whether or not to help end the violence. On the floor, with 2 streams of tears and visible injuries, was Hard Candy, the one mare who had made school a living Tartarus for Lyra. Part of her was urging her to jump in and help, while another wanted to see her worst enemy receive more torture as Bonbon or Hard Candy had dealt her. Much conflict infused young Lyra, until she saw that Bonbon had made eye contact with her. She didn't motion Lyra to help, only stared in humiliation and desperation, not expecting Lyra to help her of all ponies. Another kick was inflicted to Bonbon's leg, following an audible crack that echoed in Lyra's ears. Hard Candy had been broken, and it wasn't long before a wailing scream of pain and desperation for help escaped Bonbon's mouth. The mares just laughed at Hard Candy's screams, and finally backed off, ending their assault with a single round of spit being fired at their victim. Luckily for Lyra, she wasn't their next target, and just left in the opposite direction. Lyra wasn't sure what to do, eyeing the now broken mare she had a deep hatred for. She stood motionless for a minute or so, debating on whether to walk over and help her worst enemy, or to follow the lead of her tormentors by adding one more wad of spit to her injuries. She really wanted to add the additional torture, but then remembered back to the day when she was in the same position as her worst enemy. If she just added insult to the injuries that not-so-Hard Candy already had, she would be no better than those mares who tortured her. As much as Lyra didn't want to, she swallowed her envy into the pit of her stomach and walked over to where Hard Candy lied in pure agony. At first, Bonbon cowered, afraid that Lyra was just going to get her much-deserved revenge, but became shocked when Lyra didn't attack her. Instead, Lyra only held out her hoof in an attempt to assist her.
Come on, we need help.
I don't understand. I don't deserve your help after all the things I've done to you.
You're right. You don't deserve my help. In fact, I'm the last mare you deserve help from, but that's not how I am.
Bonbon was baffled. She didn't know whether or not to trust the mare that hated her most.
Do you want my help or not? I'm not going to hurt you if that's what you are afraid of.
Why though? I've done nothing but treated you like manure since your first day here. How can you be so generous to some pony who doesn't deserve it?
Because I forgive you.
Bonbon once again was baffled.
You what?
I forgive you.
The words Lyra had spoken continued to repeat in Bonbon's ears, as a sudden wave of emotion and sadness took hold of Bonbon's soul. Tears immediately began to shed, as she burst into a state of emotion that Lyra was even shocked at. Lyra would have never thought that there was a shred of anything nice in the body of a pony so cruel, but she wasn't one to hold a grudge on any pony, even if they didn't deserve kindness. She abandoned her motion of helping Bonbon up, and instead, leaned down to where she was level with her on the cold ground. Bonbon was too distressed to focus, so Lyra did the best thing she could have in the situation. She leaned inward with her hooves extended, and wrapped them around the distraught mare. The warmth and tightness of the hug caused Bonbon to jump in surprise. This was a different feeling than anything Bonbon had felt. It felt warm, welcoming, and friendly. She hesitated, continuing to sob, but found herself returning the hug. Her hooves caressing over Lyra's soft aquamarine fur felt like something she had never felt before. Something her father found useless in his eyes. A blossoming of a promise. The blossoming of a friendship. Bonbon hugged tighter, sniffling as she spoke.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you. everything. I'm sorry for everything.
It's okay. I forgive you, Hard Candy. I forgive you for everything you and the others did.
My real name isn't Hard Candy. Hard Candy was just the name that group gave me because my real name was considered stupid and unworthy to them.
Lyra was curious and shocked at the same time. She had only known this mare as Hard Candy, yet that wasn't even her real name?
Then what's the real name behind Hard Candy?
The mare paused, turning her head away from Lyra.
It's stupid. You laugh at it.
Try me. Can't be worse than mine.
Taking a deep breath inward, the mare with no name stuttered out the answer.
My real name is Bon Bon.
That is pretty silly.
I knew you'd laugh.
It's funny in a good way. I love it.
Bon Bon wasn't sure of how to answer that, seeing she wasn't sure if this mare was pulling her leg, or if she was being sincere.
You think your name is silly? I'm named after an instrument. My name is Lyra. Lyra Heartstrings.
Wow! You aren't kidding! Compared to my name, your name is definitely worse than mine.
See? You fit perfectly.
I guess we do.
From that moment forward, Lyra and Bon Bon had been inseparable. Two ponies that hated each other once turned out to be the perfect couple. It wasn't until college that the two had discovered their preferred choice of gender. It was a challenge for both of them to bring to light, but it became obvious after their friendship had started to become more intimate. The two would have occasional mare nights, where they'd get together and just do whatever the night brought. The first sign came when Lyra started to get aroused from the sight of Bon Bon, along with her constantly getting nervous around Bon Bon. It was to the point of where she had begun to fancy herself up whenever the two met up, whether it be for a simple task or a mare night. The second sign came when she had to share a bed with Bon Bon one night, and she constantly found herself nuzzling up against Bon Bon, and enjoyed the feeling of Bon Bon's body heat against her body. It had happened so many times that Lyra ended up sleeping elsewhere to avoid Bon Bon catching her in the act of nuzzling up against her. She had also had an urge to do much more, but ended up being able to control herself from doing such acts. At first, she wondered if it was just accidental and maybe it was due to her body looking for heat to warm up her body. She quickly debunked that as a negative, because it had not been cold that night. They had even slept on top of the covers to escape the heat. The last and obvious sign that she was attracted to Bon Bon intimately and romantically was when the two accidentally kissed. It had been one mare night, when Bon Bon had made it to the kitchen for a snack. Lyra had decided to check on Bon Bon, seeing she had taken longer than usual, and just like how most accidental kisses occur, the two had bumped into one another, and in that sudden action, had pecked their lips together. Both knew it was accidental, but at the same time, both mares had felt something special, and didn't want it to end. Bon Bon especially, seeing she too had found herself feeling strange around Lyra. The night Lyra had been nuzzling up against her, it had awoken her. But she loved the feeling of Lyra nuzzling against her body and nearly cried when Lyra moved away from her. Both came clean one mare's night, and even though the conversation was uncomfortable and hard for both the mares, it ended in them experimenting with one another to see if their assumptions were right or wrong. It didn't take long to figure out that both were right, resulting in a night of bliss. Both of them did get judged for being a couple of the same gender, but as long as they had each other, they didn't care what other ponies thought about their relationship. As they made their way into the Ponyville market, numerous stallions and mares stared daggers at them. The couple just shrugged off the fact that they were being stared down, and continued their business in the market. Bon Bon was normally the one who handled the shopping, so Lyra just stood idle, answering any questions that may have been addressed to her. To the ponies that made the motion to stare at them, Lyra just gave them an eye roll, showing she was not offended or affected by their attempt of an insult. As usual, the shopping trip didn't take any more than 10 minutes, and Bonbon had a preferred pony to go to for checkout. The pony was a young mare named Sunflower Sprink. She had only been working as a cashier in the Ponyville market for a little over a year, and was one of the few ponies that judged Bonbon and Lyra for being a same-sex couple. Thus why she was Bonbon's preferred cashier.
Morning, Sunflower.
Bonbon, how's my best customer?
The best will ever be.
Bonbon replied, referring to the multiple daggers being shot at the two of them in the marketplace.
Never mind them. You know they only do it because the ones who don't have a problem with your relationship would be looked at weirdly if they didn't follow.
Sunflower assured, writing down the prices of the items Bonbon had purchased.
Sad that ponies think like that anymore.
While doing the math for the final tally, Sunflower had spotted an item of interest.
Why? I didn't ever see you as an alcohol drinker, Bonbon.
I only drink for special occasions.
Oh, do tell. What's the occurrence?
Sunflower asked, with much curiosity and wide eyes.
Well, today marks mine and Lyra's 1-year anniversary, and we wanted to do something for the special occasion.
Bonbon confirmed, her beloved nuzzling her muzzle in a romantic manner.
Happy anniversary, you two!
Sunflower suddenly dropped the pencil she had used to tally up the total for their purchases, and leaned forward, motioning the couple to follow her lead. Bonbon and Lyra leaned forward, following Sunflower's lead.
The wine's in the house. Take it and have a great anniversary. Be sure to save me a glass, though.
Bonbon giggled, nodding her head and awaiting the final price.
That brings your total to 50 bits.
Sunflower confirmed, knocking off the additional 100 bits that would have been added if the wine were not free of charge. Bonbon laid 60 bits out on the counter, tipping Sunflower an additional 10 bits for the free wine. Sunflower bagged the additional items, handed them to Bonbon, and collected her tip, placing the other 50 in the register.
I'll be sure to save you a glass.
Bonbon whispered, then walked out of the market, noticing Sunflower wink one of her eyes.
I'll look forward to it.
About an hour passed, and the scent of the secret dish Bonbon had decided to cook for the two engulfed the house. Lyra sat idle on the living room couch. She felt her stomach growl at the smell of the dish that Bonbon had forbidden Lyra from even seeing, and licked her lips in the aroma of the scent. The scent was like that of a freshly baked loaf of bread, and a hint of some other ingredients Lyra was not familiar with. She knew one thing about the dish just from its scent. It was a fancy dish, causing Lyra to wonder where Bonbon had learned to cook so well. If this dish was anything compared to the blueberry pancakes she had cooked for breakfast that morning, Lyra wasn't sure what to expect. At the sound of the clattering of dish plates, along with silverware being placed on the dinner table, Lyra suspected that dinner was close to being served. Her theory was confirmed when Bonbon stood in the kitchen entranceway, holding a smile.
Dinner's ready!
Lyra quickly made her way to Bonbon and took her hoof in hers, navigating into the kitchen, where a set table with 2 dishes and wine glasses sat idle. The dish smelled and looked delicious, as Lyra sat down in her provided chair and waited for Bonbon to take her seat before doing anything else. Once Bonbon was seated, she placed out her hoof, which Lyra quickly took in hers.
I decided to try something different and unique. Something that resembles our love and our relationship.
Bonbon released Lyra. Then in unison, the 2 mares took a bite of the dish, which looked like some sort of manicotti dish, spread with the sauce composed of multiple spices, and topped with daisies. Red rose petals outlined the plates, with the bottle of fine wine next to the wine glasses. In Lyra's mind, it seemed like a fitting dish and had a vibe of romance. Perfect for a romantic occasion. Sticking their bites into their mouths, both of them immediately were baffled by the taste. The spice variation was perfect with no spice overpowering another, and the sauce had a perfect amount of sweetness to it with just a hint of spiciness. However, the cheese and daisies added a kick that gave the dish just the right amount of taste to even out the spiciness, causing both to smile. Bonbon had succeeded on her very first try. Lyra smiled, assuring her beloved Bonbon that the dish was delicious, which Bonbon caught and then smiled back. She reached for the wine, but Lyra quickly intervened.
Allow me. It's the least I can do after all the love and effort you put into this dish, Bonds.
Bonbon blushed, pulling her hoof back and allowing Lyra to pour her a glass. Carefully, Lyra used a provided corkscrew to release the cork from the bottle's opening, and with focus and gentle care, poured the red liquid into Bonbon's glass. She followed afterward, pouring herself a glass. Lyra wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of wine, but for this occasion, she could make an exception. She set the wine to the side and grabbed her glass, raising the glass into the air. Bonbon followed, raising her glass as well.
To us, and many more years of being together.
Bonbon announced as the two glasses clinked together and the two mares took a sip from their glasses. Setting their respective glasses to the side, Lyra and Bonbon dug into their dishes once again, staring into each other's eyes as they ate. The sound of Ponyville's fountain running water relaxed the couple as they sat on one of the provided benches, admiring the monument. Both of them were slightly buzzed from drinking a little too much wine, so the running water helped to ease their minds. They would be regretting it in the morning, but in that moment, neither of them cared the slightest about what would follow the next day. This was their night. Lyra, being the most affected by the alcohol, sat nuzzled against Bonbon's soft chest, breathing in the mixed smell of their dinner dish and Bonbon's preferred body wash. The body wash smelled like a mixture of wildflowers, including her favorite, a very rare flower that only grew in certain places throughout Equestria, the midnight blue lotus. She had only seen one in her lifetime when she was a young filly, navigating through one of the most popular landmarks of Equestria, a set of caves that were said to have been formed by a dragon centuries before the births of the royal sisters, a landmark known as the Dragon's Burrow. Lyra had visited the landmark, and while the guide was leading her group through the caves, she had spotted a large group of small flowers. The flower had seemed mystic, with its petals having a variation of colors. The flower only grew in damp and dark areas where natural streams of water ran through the underground, allowing the plant to grow naturally. The smell the plant emanated was a mystic smell, and was rumored to even have healing properties. Ever since that day, Lyra had been infatuated with the flower, and was the main reason why her favorite color was midnight blue. Whether or not the scent had healing properties was a mystery to her. Bonbon gently ran her hoof through Lyra's mane, as the two drunken mares watched Celestia's sun slowly lower behind the horizon, and Luna's moon took its place in the starry sky. It truly was one of Bonbon's favorite sights to watch, especially with Lyra. The pair had made it one of their nightly activities even before the knot had been tied, and was definitely something both of them could enjoy, drunk or not.
Ready to go home?
Lyra nodded her head as a response, too buzzed to bother responding.
Come on, Lyra Drunkstrings. Don't fall asleep too quickly. I still have one more activity before our anniversary ends.
Lyra jumped at that statement, knowing what Bonbon was referring to.
Oh, don't worry, Bon. I'm not buzzed enough to miss out on that. Just be warned, I don't play nice back.
Lyra whispered seductively into Bonbon's ear, causing her body to immediately heat up in arousement as the pair made their way back to their home for a night of bliss.